Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Shul tonight, the Shomrai Emunah. It's my privilege, my honor to introduce Dan Illouz, a member of Knesset, who is here from Eretz Yisrael visiting. And I understand you're doing a campus tour throughout the country and just got off the plane and arrived from Los Angeles. He is currently serves on the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committees in the Knesset, chairs the subcommittee on foreign trade, originally from Canada, and has been in Israel. And I don't know for how long you've been in Israel. 15 years. So it's with that, I can't say anything to add, but please come up, and we're looking very forward to hearing from
you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you for hosting me here. I also want to take just 1 second to thank the person who flew me here from Israel, which is Eli Levin, and also the organization that he leads, Hasbara Fellowships, which does incredible work in campuses all around the United States. And we know how big of a challenge this is right now. So if you want to hear more about it, you can speak to Eli afterwards. Show your hand again in 1 second, Eli. Here, you can speak to him afterwards. We're 6 months after October 7th, and I think it's a good time to just look back a little bit at what there was, remind ourselves, because unfortunately, too many people are forgetting already. And afterwards, also see where we're standing. I want to, however, speak relatively shortly and leave a lot of time for questions and answers so that I speak more about what you guys care about than what I care about. But I'll start with this brief review of where we've been and where we're headed. October 7th put us in a critical time in Jewish history and in Israel history. It was obviously one of the worst days, if not the worst day, in Israeli history. 1,200 of our brothers were killed, the biggest number since the Holocaust. But it's not just the huge number that was horrifying, it's also the tactics that were used by the terrorists who murdered them. I'm reminding you things you already know, but children burnt alive, children. Women raped and then paraded around the streets of Gaza. The elderly still being held hostage without their medication. All of this against any norm of international law or morality. And at that time, when we saw the face of evil revealed, we understood in Israel that we had only one choice, and that's to get into a very difficult war, but a war where the goal of the war will be to completely eradicate Hamas as a regime. The same way, it's happened in history in the past, where we've seen the face of evil as a free world, and we understood what needs to be done. When the free world saw the Nazis, they understood that there was only one possibility. It's either the Nazis keep on thriving and the free world disappears, or the free world defeats the Nazis and then the free world can thrive. The same thing happened with ISIS when the coalition of free nations went and defeated ISIS. In both these cases, it's not that the ideology disappeared, it existed, but we defeated, as a free world, the government that existed, the ability to govern by these evil regimes. The regime was defeated. And so that's the same goal that we put onto ourselves in Israel, to go into Gaza and to completely defeat and destroy the regime of Hamas because of the evil that was shown. Now, this is a very critical thing for us to do. I think even existential. Because we have to understand that after October 7th, if we don't do that, if we don't defeat Hamas, if we don't dismantle its regime, the message we're giving to history is a message that you can do things like October 7th, you'll get hit, and they've already been hit. But afterwards, you could regroup, retrain, and then repeat over and over and over again. And it's not only Hamas that would learn that lesson. It's also all of our other enemies, Lebanon in the north, Hezbollah, Iran, the Houthis. It's also enemies of the free world all around the world, not only enemies of Israel, terrorist groups all around the world that hate the free world. They would understand that you can do horrible things and get away with it. Not only that, but there's people who think it's a good idea right now to end this conflict by giving the Palestinians a state. I'm not getting into the argument that's an age-old argument of whether there should be or shouldn't be, but doing it now, that would give a message to history that the consequence of a massacre is diplomatic gain for the person who did it. And that's something that we can't afford to do in Israel. And so we understand that the consequence, the only consequence possible, has to be total eradication of this regime. The other reason why it's incredibly important is specific to Israel. When Israel was created, there were many different reasons why that people quoted why it was important to have a Jewish state. There were many streams of Zionism. There was political Zionism, religious Zionism, socialist Zionism, revisionist Zionism. There was many different streams. But there was one common foundation to all of the different streams. One common foundation that on that foundation, each stream built its own ideology, its own higher ideology. You can see it in the writings of Ben Gurion, in the writings of Rav Kook, of Jabotinsky, of Herzl, everyone. And that basic foundation is that Israel had to be first and foremost, on a foundational level, on a basic physical level, a safe haven for the Jews, a place where Jews will be safe, where they will be able to defend themselves. And after the Holocaust, when the whole world, and definitely especially the Jews, said never again, the greatest embodiment of this slogan was the creation of the State of Israel. Now, on October 7th, never again happened again. It happened for one day. It wasn't like the Holocaust where it happened over and over and over again for years. But yes, for one day, we got a taste of the Holocaust. And the question now is, when we said never again, did we actually mean it? And our response to this event that happened will define whether we meant it or whether it was just a slogan. And therefore, it goes to the very core of what Zionism is meant to be. And so for these two reasons, I think that it's incredibly important. We're in a very, very critical time in Jewish history and in Zionist history. And that's why when you hear in the news issues like whether we should go into Rafah or not, or issues like whether we should stop the war, and yes, release our hostages, which we really want to release, but at the cost of stopping the war, then we in Israel, and I speak for the majority of Israelis when I say that, all polls show that, we have only one answer. It's impossible. We can't. It's not an option. And it doesn't matter how much international pressure there will be, because we understand that when we have a choice between being popular or being alive, we'll always choose being alive and not being popular. And so this is where we're standing now, and that's why we are at a very critical time. I want to speak about another front. I promise I'll be short and I'll answer questions. I'm a politician, but I usually don't lie. So I do want to speak about another front, which is the Lebanese front. The Lebanese front has been, the front with Hezbollah, has been, we've been at war with Hezbollah ever since October 8th. There's no other way to say it. It's not a very intensive war. It could be a much more intensive war, but what's going on right now is a terrorist group shooting rockets at us and us responding. That's what that's what we call war. The question of Hezbollah is a very delicate question in Israel because we know that a war with Hezbollah would be a war that's much more difficult than the war with Hamas. We know that Hezbollah is much more equipped, it's much more trained, and so we know that it will be nothing like the war with Hamas. It will be a much more difficult war. But having said that, I want to tell you that my personal opinion is that after we finish the war in Gaza, we'll have no choice but to look up north and to look at reality the way it is. Because if there's one thing we've learned in October 7th, is that sticking your hand in the ground and not looking at reality in its face is very dangerous. When there's a terrorist group on your border training and amassing weapons in order to attack you, in order to destroy you, then you have to take that seriously. And unfortunately, we're at a time where as long as we wait, the more we wait to respond, the more time they have to train, to amass weapons. It's not only Hezbollah that worries me. It's the connection between Hezbollah and Iran. We all know that Iran wants to get a nuclear weapon. And that connection is relevant in two ways. Because Iran sees Hezbollah as one of two things. On the one hand, it sees Hezbollah as a guarantor that Israel will not attack its nuclear weapons. Iran sees Hezbollah as insurance policy. If we attack the nuclear reactor, then Iran will be able to respond with Hezbollah. And so it's a deterrent. By dealing with Hezbollah now, we're removing that deterrent. And then we'll be able to deal with Iran if needed. That deterrent will be removed. The other link is far more scarier in my eyes. Is that Iran plans on having a nuclear weapon, and I don't think that there's someone that knows how to promise that it will never happen. We will promise that we will do everything necessary so that it will not happen. But at the end of the day, we can't, there's nothing that's fully foolproof. And if Iran has nuclear weapons in a year, 2 years, 3 years, I don't know, and Hezbollah is there and attacks Israel then, and Iran tells us, stop, you're not responding, I have nuclear weapons. If you respond, I'll use them. That completely neutralizes our ability to respond to Hezbollah's attack. And so I really believe that after we finish the job in Gaza, we'll have no choice, not because I like war. I don't like war. As I said, it will be a very difficult war. I live in Israel. It will be scary for me and for my family. But I know that we have no other choice. And the more we wait, the scarier it will be. And therefore, I think that we'll have to take care of that. I said that the whole world is watching what we're doing in Gaza. And I spoke about our enemies that are watching. But I want to say also that our friends are watching as well. And by our friends, I mean also our new friends. In the Knesset, I serve as the chairman of the Abraham's Accords Caucus. And I'm a true believer in the Abraham's Accords. And ever since October 7th, people have asked me if I believe that the Abraham Accords are still relevant. Will they continue deepening? Will they expand? Will new countries join? I always tell people who ask me that, I really believe that they will expand, that they will deepen themselves, the accord, and that we will deepen the accords and the economic cooperation, but it depends on one thing: victory in Gaza. And the reason why it depends on that is because on the one hand, the Abraham Accords countries, they want us to win in Gaza. They don't say it publicly. They say it privately, by the way, including to me. But they don't say it publicly because they have their own population. But they want us to win in Gaza because they understand that Hamas is a threat to them as much as it is a threat to Israel, if not more. The greatest threat to the moderate regimes in the Middle East, to the regimes who want to see the Middle East progress to a better place and not go back to the Middle Ages, is the Muslim Brotherhood, which is Hamas. It's the same thing. So they see Hamas as a regime that needs to be defeated, not just for Israel's interest, but for their own interest. I'm telling you, if I would show you the WhatsApp messages that I got October 8th, 9th, 10th, the things that they told me that we should do to Hamas are things that if I would say them as an Israeli official, they would bring me to The Hague, probably. They want us to beat Hamas. But it's not only that. It's also a simple fact that peace comes when Israel is strong, because countries want to do peace with a strong country. They don't want to do peace with a weak country. They want to have a strong ally. So if they see us hesitate and not finish the job in Gaza, then they won't have any interest to sign a peace treaty. If we're strong, if we show strength, then there's a chance for peace. There's a chance for expanding the peace, including with Saudi Arabia, which is obviously the country that everyone has its eyes on. But it's not the only country. There's a lot of countries waiting in line. But we have to show strength, and then it will be possible. I want to end and open up for questions with one last thing, and maybe try to say something a little bit more positive. Because I like trying to look at things in a historical level perspective, and then try to find a silver lining. And October 7th was a very, very difficult day, and I don't think there's much ways to find a silver lining in October 7th itself. But when we look at October 7th from a historical perspective, maybe we can find some comfort. And actually, the person that told me that line that I'm going to say is Eli Levin from Hasbara Fellowship a few months ago. Because if you would have asked your grandparents, wherever they were in the world, my grandparents were from Morocco. I don't know where yours were from, but wherever they were in the world, if you would have told them about a pogrom where 1,200 Jews were brutally murdered, they would have looked at you and they would have said, that's life. It's more than we're used to, yes, but that's life. Jews get killed. There are pogroms. But if you would have told them that on that same day, on the day of that pogrom, there would be hundreds of thousands of Jews, Israeli soldiers, including hundreds of thousands of reserve soldiers that left their families, that would go in order to defend their brothers and sisters and an independent Jewish state on the land of Israel, they would tell you, you're crazy, that's impossible. I don't know, you must be smoking something. I don't know if it's legal here or not. But that's the reality we're living in. We're living in a reality where we have a state. We have an independent state. Yes, October 7th was incredibly difficult, but I want to tell you, ever since October 7th, the army has done an incredible job. We're winning this war, and hopefully we'll keep winning until the end, when we'll dismantle Hamas's regimes. Thank you very much. I want to open for questions.
It is destination of tunnel in Gaza, 400 miles. It is like more. It is like more than in Moscow. In Moscow, they built this tunnel from 1930, 100 years. They design, new manufacturing, concrete, equipment, everything. Who did the job for Gaza tunnel? It is, and this tunnel coming to Israel territory. Why Israel and another intelligence could not find out what's going on in Gaza? It is like noise, everything, manufacturing. It is a big structural structure in Gaza. Question number one. Question number two, when Gaza was free, what's happened, how Israeli can re-educate population in Gaza that they become more civil population.
So about the first question, who built the tunnels? The tunnels were built by the Palestinians. They had a huge rate of unemployment in Gaza. I guess they weren't unemployed. They were busy, and they were doing other things. And it was using, of course, all the foreign aid that got into Gaza in different ways in order to build those tunnels. There was no foreign workers there or something like that. It was. There is building equipments in Gaza. There is building equipments. They were building things in Gaza, and so the equipment and everything that's needed to build a tunnel was not things that we didn't let in because we thought they were weapons. They were things that we let in because we thought they weren't weapons. And so, as part of Gaza being rebuilt after the different conflicts that we had, these things were brought in. Now, you asked about the intelligence. This is a good question. I do want to correct one thing you said. You said tunnels came into Israel. They haven't found even one tunnel. Wait. I want to answer. They haven't found even one tunnel that has that enters Israel because we have technology in order to stop tunnels from entering Israel, and so that actually is one of the things that succeeded. But you asked about the intelligence, and it's clear there was a very big intelligence failure. There was a very big failure on many things, on many levels, when it comes to what led to the conflict. Israel will need to investigate these things, but we in Israel, we made a very clear decision that we're keeping all of these questions for the day after the war. We'll investigate everyone, including political leaders, including military leaders, everyone, in order to see what went wrong. Not because I want to hang someone. That's not, we don't want to, but because we want to make sure this doesn't happen again. But we'll do that after the war, because right now we're fighting a war that we need to win. And the people fighting the war is the same army that made mistakes. Yes, they made mistakes, but it's that same army. And I don't want them to get lawyers and be involved in trials and all of these things while they're fighting a war. I want them to focus on one thing, and that's victory. And so that's why we're waiting for the day after the war. And then all of these questions will be answered. I don't know right now why there was an intelligence failure. I can't tell you. Even though I'm a member of the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, it would be irresponsible for me to tell you that I know. I don't know. But we will know one day, and we'll do that in a very professional and deep way. The second question was, who will re-educate? That's a very good question. It's clear to us in Israel that after we defeat Hamas, one of the most important things will be to, they call it denazification, de-radicalization. Everyone has different names, to make the population not radical anymore. And it's clear that the educational system is a big part of it. You're asking who? Yes. I don't know yet. We're working on it. Who know? I know. UNRWA, no. UNRWA has been in Gaza for a long time, and they're part of the problem. Unfortunately, they're also in the eastern parts of Jerusalem. They're also in Judea and Samaria, and they incite for terror also in these places. UNRWA, no. What was before October 7th isn't what will be after October 7th. But who? Yes, we're dealing. We don't have an answer yet. Yes, Dan.
Two questions. One, I know you're a reserve officer in IDF as well, as a member of Knesset. Can you give us some light as to what went wrong with this attack on the 8th convoy, and whether you agree, or is it a matter of not politics, to discuss how the IDF is punishing the people who are responsible? And secondly, when it comes to good things that came from the attack, it's hard to even say those words, but the unity of the country is the thing I would ask you about. I know that you were very involved in issues relating to the judicial reform, and do you really feel the country is unified enough to go forward? I was at a protest yesterday, which I thought it was going to be pro-Israel. It turned out to be a lot of the people there, including some of the families of the hostages, were really there to cast it for internal Israeli political reasons. And I wanted you to comment on if we're going to have unity going forward.
Good questions. The aid workers that were killed, I'll say very clearly, it's a tragedy. No one in Israel wanted that to happen. I'll tell you even the opposite. We spoke about UNRWA a second ago. To us, this organization is the opposite of UNRWA. It's an organization that we could work with, an organization that actually came to Gaza to do humanitarian work. And so we had not only no interest, we had the opposite interest. So we wanted that organization to thrive in order to replace UNRWA. But war is war, and war happens, and in war mistakes happen, and people who go into a war zone know they're taking a risk. That doesn't make the tragedy to their families any less, right? I'm sure their family are suffering. But that's the nature of war. Just so you know, I don't want to give a certain number because I don't have the exact number, but there were a lot of Israeli soldiers that were killed by friendly fire. Mistakes. No one's saying that you should stop the war because of that you should. It's war. In war, there's casualties, and sometimes those casualties come from mistakes. Now, you asked about the political question because you like politics. I'll answer. I think it's completely uncalled for. I think that, as I said, in war, there are tactical mistakes. That's a tactical mistake. It's not someone that decided to kill aid workers out of spite or something like that. It's something that happened in the field in the midst of a war. And I don't think that those officers should have been fired. I don't know how much international pressure there was in order to do that. And so I can't comment on that. I wasn't privy to it. But I don't think that that was the right thing to do. Your second question is also a good question. Israel has never been as united as it was on October 8th, right? There's no question about that. And I think that that unity has lasted. If you ask me up until today, and I'll explain what I mean in a second. It's true that in the last week and a half, there has been protests that have started to remind us. There's been protests for the hostages' families for a long time, but they started to remind us in the last week and a half more of the protests that there were before October 7th, and that reminds us of the divisions that there were before October 7th. Before October 7th, we were as divided as we ever were, right? If I said on October 8th, we were as united, October 7th, you all remember on Yom Kippur, what happened over there, the fights in Tel Aviv and things. Those are things that like we don't want to even remember. We want to like cross them off from our minds. And a lot of people are afraid that now it's coming back. I believe that the great majority of Israelis are still incredibly united. And the reason is very simple. It's because of the hundreds of thousands of soldiers, as we spoke about, that are fighting side by side. Imagine risking their lives one for the other. I mean, someone that's protested for the judicial reform and someone that protested against the judicial reform were risking their lives one for another. And some of them lost their lives one for another. And when they come back from the front to their families and all of that, Israel doesn't stay the same. It changes. It changes in a very deep way. So yes, you still have fringes that are very extreme, sorry, and that's the word, and that are still very divisive. And I'm not talking there about the hostage families. I am not in a place where I can in any way judge or anything for the hostage families. But yes, the people around them that take this issue in order to divide on both sides. There's people that use other issues also on my side in order to divide. I'm talking on both sides. I don't want to sin in what I'm trying to not do. On both sides, those people are a small minority. They're not the whole left. They're a small minority. That's what they are. The great majority of Israelis are still very united. I hope that politicians are smart enough to understand that, because I've seen that some politicians have started joining the rallies now in the middle of the war. I think that's a huge mistake for them politically. If they would ask me for political advice, I would tell them that they're doing something very dumb, because Israel isn't looking for that right now. Israel wants to see victory on the field. Yes.
Gaza people. I think that there are two hostages, Israeli hostages and the Gazan people. Now, whether they love us or don't love us, they are essentially non-combatants. And it's also a albatross around Israel's neck, because for the past month or more, they've been waiting, delaying, and getting pressure from the United States and from the rest of the world not to harm the hostages. Get the hostages out. Form a tent city of 200,000 tents. Get the hostages out and bomb the living daylights out of them. Get the hostages.
You're
out.
talking about the Palestinian civilians.
Palestinian civilians, Gaza civilians.
That's what we plan on doing. I mean, and not bomb the hell out of them, but because there's still gonna be some civilian. There's still gonna be civilians left. That's what we did in northern Gaza. We removed the civilian population from northern Gaza. Then we attacked. That's what we did in Khan Yunis. We removed the civilian population. Again, civilians stay. It's not 100%. And so even after you do that, Israel is the most moral army in the world. To be honest, other armies don't do that, but we do that. We're still careful not to kill civilians, and we do that as much as we can. Again, war, it doesn't happen. It's not perfect, but we do as good as we can. And so before entering Rafah,
But the civilians are there. Get the civilians out.
but what does that mean? Get the civilians out? We called on.
200,000.
But that's what we did. Again, sir, I don't know your name, but that's exactly what we did in northern Gaza and in Khan Yunis, and now they're in Rafah. Before attacking Rafah, we'll do the same thing. I imagine there are plans to remove the civilians from Rafah before we attack there. The arguments right now between the United States and Israel are actually about those plans. They're not about. There's a misunderstanding sometimes that as if the United States doesn't want us to enter Rafah at all. The United States wants to see plans for us to remove the civilians from Rafah before. And so we're working on plans right now together with our American allies. So that's exactly what we're doing. Sorry, I think he was waiting for a long time, and then we'll go to the other.
I would like to ask a question about Rafah, because from my understanding, Israel has been done with large, intense operations in Khan Yunis for a while now. Prime Minister Netanyahu said that Israel was going to go into Rafah on Ramadan. Obviously, that was not true. He's also said that we have the date, we're ready, we're planning it. But he tells the US that they can't see a plan. He also seems to be getting criticism from Israelis, both the left, saying he's not making any decisions for political reasons, and Ben Gvir now saying that he's not doing anything to move into Rafah. That criticism is mounting, and I do believe that as this war goes on with no progress, that Israel's reputation in the United States and elsewhere is getting worse. And I'm not saying that should change how you prosecute the war, but that's something to take into consideration. Why do you think Prime Minister Netanyahu has not moved forward on Rafah more with evacuating civilians and then going into Rafah? Why has it been so many months now without that progress?
So before Ben Gvir and before the left, there was this guy, freshman member of Knesset called Dan Illouz, that criticized Netanyahu for not, even though he's in his party, right? I'm in his party, for not doing enough to go into Rafah 3 months ago. And that has been in the foreign. I don't discuss what's in the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, so I won't tell you what answers I got. But it's been asking why it's not happening ever since at every single meeting. And so I agree with you. You asked me why does Netanyahu not do it? I think that he really values, and you can see that in his whole career, the alliance with the United States, even if sometimes it's through tough love and things like that, but he really cares deeply about the relationship because he thinks it's strategic to Israel. By the way, it is. I don't disagree with him on that. And therefore, he wants to try to get to some understanding with the United States and is willing to wait. I think it's a mistake because I think that if we would have done Rafa 3 months ago when I first talked about it, we would have been done with it now. And yeah, there would have been criticism, but everyone would have forgotten about it by now. Instead, you have TV show after TV show, TV newscast after TV newscast that speak about Rafah, the civilians there. Is Israel going to go in or not? And it makes it an even bigger issue than what it was. It is a big issue. It's not a simple military operation, but it's making it even bigger than what it is. And so I disagree with him on that. But I don't think it comes from, I don't agree with those who say that he's just waiting in order to stay in power. I completely disagree with that. I think he's doing it in order to try and find a way to do it together with American support, to do as much as possible in order not to break that relationship. Yes.
You're working on behalf of Hasbara in the United States, which is wonderful because so much misinformation is spreading and it's really hurting the cause. And they have configured the Arab narrative based on lies and rewriting history, basically. But what's really happening in these college campuses, it's not just because they're students and young and idealistic, because I visited college campuses recently in South America, and there was nobody protesting. There were no signs. So it led me to believe that there's some kind of organized effort on the college campuses. What's behind it? What's really happening there?
So first of all, the best person to ask is Eli Levine, but I'm gonna try to answer to the best of my ability. We've seen very clear signs of foreign funding on college campuses. It's very clear that Qatar has been involved with that, including to the level of making its funding contingent on a lot of power that they want to have as to nominating faculties and a lot of things like that. But it's been a very slow process, not a quick process. They've been working on it very, very slowly for many, many years. And now we're seeing it burst into our faces. I was a college, I didn't speak about myself so much. I was born and raised in Montreal, Canada, and I moved to Israel at age 23 after I finished McGill Law School. I was a college student in North America. And I was an advocate. I'm actually an alumni of Hasbara Fellowships. And I was an advocate on campus. And I remember it was tough. It was tough. But it was nothing close to what there is today. Nothing. I mean, you see the deans and you see all of you see it, like it's not even hidden. It's just right in front of our face. And it's clear, like those deans and that Congress hearing with Stefanik, etc. It was clear to me that someone's controlling them. I don't know if it's their lawyers or if it's their funders. I don't know, but someone's controlling them. It didn't make any sense. And so I think you're right. There is some concerted effort behind the scenes. What Israel does about that is I can't talk about so much, but yes. I'm sorry, but no. No, I'm serious. I'm sorry, but no. Sorry? But if you have another question, I'm sorry. I can't. I will just say like that. I will address what you just said. Because I think it's similar to what I said about Lebanon. You're right. Sometimes a certain action will create a dangerous situation, but not taking such an action can create an even worse situation. And so that's the trade-off. I mean, for years, Israel didn't go into Gaza for various reasons, right? Now everyone is telling Netanyahu, why didn't you go, right? No one then said we should go. No one. From right and left, no one. There was consensus. You do those like little rounds and then you get years of because going in, the cost would be too high. But we saw that the cost of not going in was even higher. And so it's always a question of trade-off. Yes. Oh, that's a good question. I started saying my life story. So I was born and raised in Montreal and moved to Israel at age 23 after finishing McGill Law School. And right after I moved to Israel, I got involved in the public service and in politics. I decided that since I moved to Israel out of Zionism and in order to be a part of Israel's incredible story, so I wanted to also be a part of those who wrote that story. So I got involved in my local politics. First of all, I was elected as a member of the Jerusalem City Council. I served there for 1 term. And afterwards, in the last election, I ran in the Likud primaries and was elected. I convinced enough people to vote for me. That's basically how you become an elected official. Yes.
Regard to college campuses, a lot of people don't realize it. There are a lot of Muslim students in colleges because they pay full fare. American students hardly pay the 60 or 70,000 tuition a year. So a lot of the oil wealthy Arabs can afford to send so there are a lot of Muslims who are, plus the fact that the DEI programs here convince a lot of kids to go along with, I don't know how many people are familiar with that, but they teach that there are the good and the bad, the whites are the bads, and the people of color are the good people, and that Jews are affiliated with the white people. And so, you know, that is a common thing. It's gone below the college level. It's on a high school and also on elementary school level now. So that spreads a lot of anti-Semitism, a lot of anti-Israel feeling here. But let me also say, with regard to that military, with regard to the military question, Netanyahu's not running the show himself as far as the military goes. And you still have a lot of left-leaning Shomrai Hatzair generals there who are basically running the show along with Netanyahu. So I don't know how much Netanyahu, the Likud, is responsible for not going into Rafah now.
I'll answer this.
And there are others like him.
I'll answer this. Israel is a very diverse society and its military is very diverse. It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. I trust my military. I think the IDF is an incredible army. I trust my soldiers and our generals. And at the end of the day, they do what we politicians tell them. And I don't like the game of blaming the military when we can't make strong decisions. We need to know as politicians to make strong decisions.
Are you in favor of taking away all the checkpoints in the West Bank for the last number of years?
What? Sorry?
Taking away the
checkpoints
checkpoints in the West Bank that were instituted after Operation Offensive Shield, after the Second Intifada.
Yes.
They put all those checkpoints.
The ones who actually wanted to remove.
And then they took it away so that it became a shooting gallery.
First of all, look, I'll move to the other question after answering you. First, I'll answer you. I didn't say that I agree with everything that's done militarily in Israel. That's not what I said. I said that at the end of the day, the first people that need to be accountable are the politicians, because we can oversee what the army does. Sometimes you're right, the decisions are made on the army level, but we're overseeing them. The cabinet, definitely. I'm a member of the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, but there's a cabinet which actually has decision-making power, and they can give orders to the army. And so, yes, I said beforehand, when we'll investigate what happened on October 7th, we'll investigate also the military. It needs to be done. But I don't like the instinct of blaming the military for things that politicians should also be held accountable for. We should all be held accountable for, including myself. Who wanted? Yeah, you in the back, sorry. Another one in the back, and then you'll be next, okay?
There is so much misinformation which is presented throughout the United States. Is there any concerted effort to write an ongoing history of this conflict as it occurs that would present accurate information going back to the history from when Hamas took over Gaza and all the wars, so that there's a chance of presenting concise sequential information describing Israel's position to to communicate with people, obviously not the ones who should know better, but the many people who are being brainwashed.
You're asking if there's materials that are being prepared?
Yes, in other words, if you were going to share, if this organization, Camera or other organizations had a history going back to before 1948, but so much has gone on in the last 6 months that should be presented in a concise manner to be able to present this information. And I'm wondering whether or not there is any.
So I'll say I'm not sure I understood your question, so I'll answer, and if it's not the right answer, you'll tell me. First of all, inside the army, I don't think answers your question, but I'll say it anyways. There is a unit that actually the whole purpose of that unit is to document everything that happens for historical purposes. But I think you're more talking about how do we use it right now in order to win in the public diplomacy war. So there's a department in the Prime Minister's office that is responsible for that. It doesn't get enough budget, and I'm not sure it's has enough resources or that it does enough of a good job. But that's their job, and so part of my job is to oversee their work, and so that's why I'm a little. Anyways, you saw my reaction, but that's part of my job is to oversee their work. But that's their job, and they do stuff. They do coordinate with NGOs. I imagine Hasbara is connected with them and others in order to ensure that the information flows between all the different people. Social media is one of the most important things nowadays, and so they use different social media tools both in order to promote content on social media and also in order to coordinate with different what's called influencers in social media. They create content, videos, flyers, things like that. They do things, but if you want to tell me that it's not enough, then I'll tell you that I agree with you that it's not enough, that there should be more. Yes.
Two separate questions, both. First, I want to echo what the other gentlemen said. Thank you very much for coming to the.
Thank you.
Very different questions. One is how in Israel are they doing the threat from Yemen, the Houthis? And the second question is for a community such as ours, or maybe broadly to the American Jewish community, where does the Israeli government want us to focus our efforts? Like in what ways do we focus our efforts?
So the first question, Yemen. Since the beginning of the conflict, Israel made a strategic decision, which I'll be honest, at the beginning I thought was the bad decision, but I'm being convinced that I was wrong, which was to let the world take care of Yemen because the world sees it as a threat to themselves. And so Israel doesn't need another front. Why did I think it was a bad decision? Because I thought if someone shoots at you, then you have to shoot back, period. But the world actually did go in and is dealing with the threat of Yemen, maybe not strongly enough. I agree with you, Dan, not strongly enough, but they are taking care of it to a certain extent. And also, it's in Israel's interest not to open a multi-war front. That's, by the way, the reason why I didn't say that, but I said that we need to take care of Lebanon, but I didn't say today. I said after we finish in Gaza, because multi-front wars are very difficult to win, almost impossible. When you look at they're not impossible. We'll win them if we have to, but they're very difficult. And if you look at history, they make life difficult in conflict, if you learn the history of conflict. And so we made a decision to focus on Gaza, in Lebanon to keep it at the lower intensity, and with the Houthis in Yemen to let the world take care of that problem. I think it was a good decision in hindsight. Second question, Americans, yes. First of all, I have to say that I've been in America a few times since October 7th for these types of things. And the tremendous support from the Jewish community is incredible. I mean, Dan spoke about how Israel was divided before October 7th and how we're united now and will we stay united. And same thing can be said about diaspora Jewry and Israel. There was this I don't know how many conferences I went to that spoke about the divisions between diaspora Jewry and Israel. Now, on October 8th, diaspora Jewry showed up, and when it was in trouble, And then Israel tried to see how it can help also here in America to fight anti-Semitism and all of these things. And we remembered, it's too bad we needed a reminder, but we remembered that we're one nation with one common past and one common future and destiny. And so that's something very, very meaningful. Now, practically, what can be done, I usually answer by saying that there's a few things. First of all, obviously, supporting financially is something which is very helpful. Everyone has NGOs that they like or things like that. There's a lot of needs in Israel right now, whether it's the people that are still not living in their homes in the north because they're being attacked, or whether it's things that can help the soldiers, or there's a lot of needs, and everyone can think about what's closest to his heart and support it, and that's something that helps a lot. Speaking out in letters to the editor, social media, all of these things, that also helps. Our enemies are very good at it, unfortunately. We need to become better at it. And we need to also know how to speak out. And the last thing, and Dan's the professional on that, but I think it's very important, is to speak to your members of Congress, to speak to your elected officials. I can tell you as an elected official myself, that before I was elected, I didn't realize how much power there is to a simple WhatsApp that I get from a constituent, because it catches my attention. I want to get reelected, so I read it and I try to help, or I take it into consideration. You have a lot of power. And so whenever there's tensions or things like that, especially then, to try and lower the tensions in order for us to keep this friendship and alliance between America and Israel as strong as possible. Yes.
I saw actually your name attached about, I'm not sure of the technical term, but basically a bill being introduced to annex more parts of Israel, to be real parts of Israel, effective October 7th. Is this something that you think can really happen?
You ask if it, okay, I'll start by answering another question, which is why. I think that that in this war, we need to understand that because of the reasons that I said in my opening statements, we need some victory picture. I don't know how you say that in English. A picture, an image of victory, vision, something that will show that we won, and something that will make Hamas regret the day that they went on this terrorist strike, on this massacre. Now, the problem is that Hamas is a terrorist organization, and they don't care about dying. They don't care about anything, basically. So you have to communicate in their language, and I know that them seeing more sovereignty of Israel on its land is something which will to them be a deterrent of doing it again and again. And therefore, other than the military action, which is important in order to stop their ability to do it on a physical level, I think that there needs to be also something which is done on a more on a broader level, on a more ideological level, as anti their ideology, basically. So that's why I did it. You're asking me for the chances. I have to be fully honest that I don't think that the Israeli government will support my bill because I think that they will be scared of American opposition. But that doesn't mean I won't push. Yes.
So I guess my understanding is that the last few Hamas battalions are based in Rafah. So if we move the civilians out, how does it work? Like, how do we know that they don't also pose as civilians and all just like sneak out into the civilian areas?
So first of all, there is intelligence, but I want to say also it doesn't really matter at the end of the day, because our strategy is not to completely, right now, we want to kill every single Hamas terrorist, but right now, immediately, our strategy is not to kill every single one of them. Our strategy is to dismantle their battalions. If they're dismantled because they spread around in all of Gaza and then they're not organized anymore, then they're not a battalion anymore. And so it creates the same effect. We want to destroy the battalions, their ability to rule over Gaza, And then afterwards, we understand that, by the way, the war is not over then. The war is just changing phases. It will become a war where we'll be in some sort of guerrilla warfare, not army against army. They have an army right now. It's not exactly a very good army, but it's an army. And it will change to guerrilla warfare. The biggest example of that is the Shifa Hospital. Shifa Hospital is in an area that we already dismantled the battalions in. And then afterwards, they went out of their holes, basically, and they went into the Shifa Hospital. And so we went back in order to destroy them. We'll be in and out a lot in the next few months. Unfortunately, I imagine also the next few years. And so we'll be in and out a lot. But right now, we're focused on the battalions. And so if they spread around and they don't act as a battalion anymore, then that's another way to dismantle the battalions.
So my understanding about the humanitarian aid in the past was that it was difficult to get it in because of all the checks that had to go, like security checks that had to go through. And then also the other issue was the distribution was a bigger issue.
So the first issue is a myth. It's not true. It's only a small percentage of. It's true that the everything that goes in is checked by Israel, but only a small percentage has not been brought in, and there's been lines within Gaza on the other side of the border of Gaza with humanitarian aid, because there was so much humanitarian aid that the Palestinians weren't able to deal with it. It was coming at a quicker pace that they can deal with. And so it's a myth. It's a myth, of course, that people use against Israel, but it's not true. The second question, though, is very true. There is a problem about distribution. Ever since the beginning of the war, we've been dealing with this problem, and I alluded to it when we spoke about the tragedy of the 7 aid workers that died. To us, this was an alternative, because what happened since the beginning of the war? The two main groups that distributed aid were Hamas themselves, which is absolutely insane to let that continue, or UNRWA, which is not so different from Hamas. And so we were trying to look for alternatives, and that was one of the alternatives. Right now, it's pretty much frozen, but we're trying to either restart that or find another alternative.
Right, so
There's a question there. Okay, you want one last one? Okay.
that was my understanding with the aid, is that it was a myth, so then I don't understand why, so if there was no issue with the flow of aid and there was enough aid going in, why all of a sudden are we increasing the aid?
America said so.
You said it. It's not exactly America said so. But yeah, there's been a lot of international pressure to do that. Will it get to the right people? I mean, I saw yesterday that some of this aid was already taken by armed Hamas officials. Clear videos of that happening, and so it's the same problem. The pace of the aid going to the right people is slow, but it's on the Gaza side, not on the Israel side. It's because on the Gaza side, they're not organized in order to. If we want to just give it to Hamas and to UNRWA, then yeah, it can go very quickly. Yes. We'll do 2 last questions. Is that okay? Yeah? Okay. You also want one? So 3 last questions. Okay. All right. That's not what he said, but I'll explain. Okay. Netanyahu said that military pressure will bring a better deal. That doesn't mean that he said that only force. I mean, we released only 3 hostages by force, right? We've released also bodies of hostages by force, but we only 3 alive. But we've already released almost half of the hostages through a deal that was enabled through force. After they had a lot of pressure, then they were then they agreed to a deal. I don't know what Netanyahu's stance is now. I imagine that it's still the same stance, because he didn't say he changed the stance, and he keeps saying the same sentence, and so I imagine he believes the same thing. I don't know if I answered your question. Again, Netanyahu's position is that he does want a deal, but he wants a good deal. And he believes that the only way to get a deal which isn't existentially problematic for Israel, which means that doesn't end the war or that doesn't, that's a big problem for Israel, is to put military pressure in order to make them agree to a better deal. And so that's still a stance, I believe. Him and then you. Okay, first the.
Lebanon is a very big economy in Lebanon. They have different nationality, Christian and Muslim. Can government of Lebanon, all people, provide deterrence against Hezbollah?
Unfortunately, Hezbollah is stronger than Lebanon right now. So it's not so much of a possibility. Hezbollah is very strong in Lebanon. It's part of the government. It basically controls the government, not 100%, but it has some strong influence on the government. And even militarily, it's as strong or maybe stronger than the Lebanese army. And so it's not so relevant to expect of the Lebanese government to do something. Actually, part of the Lebanese government is Hezbollah, and so it doesn't so much work.
Embassy from Lebanon in Israel.
No.
It's against the law to talk to Israel.
In Lebanon. Last question.
Recently, there's been a lot of calls externally, but now internally in Israeli politicians are calling possibly for elections or speaking more about them. As a member of the Likud, I'm just curious what your response would be in this current time to the call for an election in the middle of
I think that elections right now would be incredibly detrimental to our war. Because I think that during elections, people are divided, not united. And if there's one thing that we need in order to win this war, we alluded to it a lot, but I want to say it more clearly. It's a basic need in order to win is for unity to exist. Without that, we won't win the war. It's maybe the most important thing. And so I think that having elections now would be a very bad idea. That doesn't mean that I think that politicians shouldn't be held accountable and that questions shouldn't be asked and that investigations should be committees and things like that shouldn't be established. They should, just not right now. Let us win the war. And after we finish that, we'll deal with all of these things. Anyways, thank you very much. I was happy to be here. Thank you.
I want to thank Knesset Dan Illouz for coming to join us tonight. We had, and Menashe will know this better, but when I was checking Zoom, we had anywhere upwards of between 40 to 50 people on Zoom. So we had a nice turnout
Thank you.
who were interested. So thank you very much for coming.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.